We now come to our final source of the law, that source that we call general principles of law and equity. Whenever you see the word equity or equitable in the law, what it really means is fairness, fundamental fairness. So what are these general principles? Again, according to the experts, general principles of the law are those principles that are common to the major legal systems, even if they are not incorporated or reflected in either a customary international law or an international agreement or treaty. We often use general principles as simply a gap filler, something to fill the gap where there is no specific international rule, either from custom or from a treaty. Nevertheless, we're going to fill in that gap with the use of these general principles. And so these general principles are definitely the least important of the sources of law and only come into play if there is not a custom or a treaty that references this specific point. So what are we talking about when we talk about general principles? So general principles have a role. They may serve as a source of interpretation for international law. If a treaty or custom is not specific, we can determine the meaning of the treaty by relying on what are the general principles. How would this be treated throughout the country, throughout the world, General principles are also a way of developing new norms to be incorporated into international law. These new customs that are going to be created may derive from general principles that are put into place that apply to international legal disputes. General principles, again, can also be a supplemental source to international law. They can play that gap filler role. And they actually may be a modifier of international legal rules based on where the dispute has occurred. So what are some of the general principles of the law? And you should know a few of these for your test purpose. And we start out with this idea of property rights. The vast majority of states in the world respect private property. Private property, obviously very important in the American system, in Western legal systems, but also around the world. We respect property rights. Religious rights. Again, these are rights that most countries respect, that you have the ability to worship in a manner that you want to. You have these rights simply as a human being. A right to privacy. Privacy is not set out. It's not set out in the United States Constitution, for instance. But the Supreme Court has described privacy as being part of the overall umbrella of rights in the United States. That the rights that we know in the United States about things like freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and freedom of worship. And those elements are really based on the idea of a right to privacy. That the right to privacy, although it's not set out in the Constitution, supports all of the rights that are in the Constitution. And so a right to privacy is something that is reflected around the world, throughout the world's major legal systems. There's also a right to lawyer-client privilege, this idea that a client can tell things to their lawyer without fear that the lawyer is going to be required to testify to them. So this idea that you can tell anything to your lawyer is based on a recognition that that relationship, lawyer-client, has something special involved. I did some criminal law work in my past, and I was involved in the criminal defense clinic in law school. And that was a clinic where we actually represented indigent clients in court. And we did so under the supervision of other practicing attorneys. And I can remember one of the first questions I asked the attorney that I was assigned to, my mentor, was to say, "Do you ask them if they did it?" And he told me, "I always ask them they did it. Not so much that I'm going to judge them for doing it or not, but I want to know what they think they did. And so in any criminal action you see or you experience, generally the lawyer knows whether the client did it or not. But the role of the lawyer is to defend the client. It's not to provide an element of truth or justice to the court system. Due process is another word that you've heard a lot, I'm sure, without really understanding what it is. Due process is a common law rule. It arose out of the Anglo-American system. What due process really means is have a set of rules and follow them. Doesn't mean that things are going to always work out or that anyone who goes to court has a 50% chance of winning. It simply says there must be rules in place and the government should follow them. Due process. Now, in our system, when we talk about due process, there's really two aspects of due process, and you should know this for your test. And the first is notice. That if someone violates the law, we should give to them notice of that perceived violation. And then the second aspect of due process is an opportunity to be heard. So when you are driving too fast on the highway and you're exceeding the speed limit and a police officer pulls you over and they write you a ticket, that ticket is notice of what it is you've accused of been doing. And that ticket will also include a date at which point you have the opportunity to tell a neutral third party, ordinarily a judge, your side of the story. So notice and an opportunity to be heard, those are key elements of due process. Non-retroactivity is another concept, a general principle, which is to say a legislature, for instance, should not be able to pass a law that makes an activity that was previously legal illegal and then act on it. So I can't go back in time and impose a new law on an activity that already occurred. So non-retroactivity. Legal review says that there should be another body that examines a legal action. You should have a right to appeal to another body. So these are all general principles of the law. And again, know a few of them for your test. So in conclusion, what did we learn today? Customary international law relates to general practices recognized by nations. Treaties can take different forms. And general principles involve areas of the law that all civilized nations have or should have adopted. That's it for this one. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks.